Some truths don't fit into headlines because power is rarely about just policy. It's about memory, identity, and the stories we tell ourselves, especially at home. In the end, no country separates its foreign policy from its domestic politics. And here's what I've learned. If you want to understand why the United States makes the choices it does in the Middle East, don't just look at maps or alliances. Listen to what's said at campaign rallies, in Congress, at church, in living rooms. And if you want to understand power, you have to listen to those who shape it, even when it's uncomfortable, especially then. I'm Joe Kawly, and in this episode of The Diplomat, I sit down with Aaron David Miller, a former U.S. peace negotiator, policy advisor, and one of the clearest voices on what Washington says and what it tries not to say. Miller spent decades inside the room trying to broker peace between Israelis and Palestinians. He's advised Republicans and Democrats, spending decades behind the scenes of U.S. diplomacy, from Camp David to Gaza, from Clinton to Bush to Obama. And now he says what others won't. In this conversation, Miller and I talk about what has changed in the evangelical and pro-Israel alliance and what hasn't, the political cost of staying silent on Gaza, and why even now, no president wants to be seen as the one who lost Israel. This is The Diplomat, where we decode what power says and what it tries not to say. And this is a conversation you won't hear anywhere else. Mr. Miller, thank you for being with us. Let's start with our first theme, Trump-Netanyahu and the Evangelicals. Who actually is in the driver's seat? Trump 2.0, Netanyahu is still in power, but the relationship isn't what it seems to be. Evangelicals still support Israel deeply, but the cracks are showing, especially among younger voices and MAGA figures who are watching the humanitarian crisis in Gaza, from Marjorie Taylor Greene to Tucker Carlson to Candace Owens. They are speaking up now differently. And you have said before that the United States-Israel policy is often shaped more by domestic politics than strategy. What are we really looking at right now with Trump and Netanyahu partnership, power play, or political convenience?
I mean, it's a good question. We're only 6 months into the Trump administration, and Trump administration is dealing with the longest governing prime minister in the history of the state of Israel, the most politically ruthless and skilled politician, and a man who stands a fair chance, if elections in Israel come about in early 2026, of being reelected. Donald Trump, on the other hand, is a situationalist. I don't think he has strategic instincts, but I don't think he thinks in terms of strategic implementation. He's very much moved by the moment. Domestic politics, his financial interests, his vanities, his ego, his likes and dislikes continue to drive much of what you've seen over the past 6 months. I think that Donald Trump and Netanyahu have an instrumental sort of relationship based on shared interests at times. There's also tension, and there's been tension. I served in every administration since Jimmy Carter to Bush 43. No American president, without exception, Republican or Democrat, has done things to sideline and marginalize Israel to the degree that Trump has.
How is he marginalizing Israel?
He urged his hostage negotiator, or sanctioned his hostage negotiator, Adam Boehler, in March to open a dialogue with Hamas, an organization which is declared a foreign terrorist organization by American law and statute. The Israelis learned about this after the fact. He cut a deal with the Houthis, which essentially said, as long as you leave American naval ships alone, we don't like the fact that you're attacking Israel, but we're not going to make that conditional on this arrangement. He eliminated sanctions on the government of Ahmed Shara over the objections of Netanyahu. He opened negotiations with Iran, literally announcing them in the presence of the Israeli prime minister in April, something Netanyahu urged him not to do. And he freed Edan Alexander on the cusp of his trip to Saudi Arabia through an American-Palestinian cutout, Bashar Abahba, who was dealing directly with Hamas's external leadership in Doha, a fact that the Israelis learned about after the fact. No American president I ever worked for ever undermined the so-called no daylight policy that has bound Israel and the US. But there is tension. And in my judgment, Netanyahu has not crossed the 3 red lines that would in fact compel an American president, in this case Trump, to apply pressure. Number one, he still doesn't believe, even though he may think it privately, that Netanyahu is playing him. That's one. Number two, he doesn't believe that Netanyahu has made him look weak. In fact, you could argue, based on Israel's 12 days of strikes against Iran, that he opened the door, Netanyahu opened the door for Trump to be strong. Trump did what no American president ever did. He struck Iran directly without triggering a regional war. There was zero cost or consequence for Donald Trump, maybe among some of his MAGA base, because he said he wouldn't get the U.S. into wars. And finally, Donald Trump would pressure Netanyahu if he came to believe that Netanyahu stood between Donald Trump and something he really, really wanted.
Which is?
But right now, well, I can think of a couple of things: an Israeli-Saudi normalization agreement and a Nobel Peace Prize. But we're far away from that. So Donald Trump has the potential to be tough with Israel. Right now, I think there is very close coordination. Tomorrow, Monday, or maybe even sooner, the administration is going to announce a new assistance plan for Gaza. Donald Trump has asked the Israelis to fund it, $30 million. And number two, I don't think that Trump has yet concluded that he has to force Netanyahu, pressure him to end the war in Gaza. So I think it's a very instrumental relationship. Neither man trusts one another. Neither man likes one another, I don't think.
But Trump, to understand this relationship, Trump once gave Netanyahu everything: Jerusalem, the Golan Heights, the Iran deal kill switch. Now he sounds frustrated. He even contradicted Netanyahu on starvation in Gaza. Is that a crack in the armor, or just Trump being Trump?
I mean, again, American presidents, based on my experience, don't like to fight with Israeli prime ministers. In fact, no American president that I worked for willfully picked a fight with Israel. There have been moments of tension. The Reagan administration suspended 3 shipments of American advanced aircraft to Israel. My former boss, James Baker, denied Israel $10 billion housing loan guarantees. But the last president, the only president in the history of this relationship to truly threaten Israel with consequences was Dwight Eisenhower, who threatened to sanction Israel, Ben-Gurion, if he did not withdraw Israeli forces from Sinai during the British-French-Israeli campaign to seize the canal and depose Nasser. No American president since. None.
Why is that? Why U.S. presidents cannot criticize what their ally, Israel, does? You said in 2022, in a podcast for Carnegie, America is trapped in the Middle East. It cannot transform and cannot leave. Is that one of the reasons why this is happening?
I think, look, the underlying reasons that constrain American presidents from pressuring Israel. Number one, it's bad politics. And no American president, with possible exception of Jimmy Carter, risked profoundly angering pro-Israeli supporters in the United States. Now the evangelical Christians play a considerable role. They did in pressing Trump on Jerusalem, not just recognizing Jerusalem as the capital, moving the embassy. You have, for the first time in the history of the U.S.-Israeli relationship, an evangelical Christian, Mike Huckabee, who is the U.S. ambassador to Israel. So there's a political cost for fighting with Israel. Second, many presidents have an emotional bond with Israel that is quite rare in the way presidents relate to other foreign countries. Bill Clinton, I saw this personally when Rabin was murdered. Bill Clinton wrote in his memoir, and I watched the president grieve Rabin's murder. Bill Clinton wrote in his memoir, I loved Rabin as I had loved no man. That's an extraordinary statement. Ronald Reagan had this deep and abiding commitment to Israel. One of the reasons Joe Biden failed to exercise any pressure on Israel in the wake of October 7th, 2023, was Biden's emotional commitment. So that's the second reason. And the third reason is most American presidents look at cooperating with Israel as a way to achieve some success. Kissinger and Nixon ended up negotiating successfully 3 disengagement agreements, 2 with Egypt, 1 with Syria in the wake of the October War. Jimmy Carter told me when I interviewed him for both of my books that Menachem Begin came farther with respect to making concessions than Anwar Sadat. And James Baker had a functional relationship with Yitzhak Shamir despite all the tensions. These 3 presidents, Nixon and Ford, Carter, and Bush 41, all achieved successes by working with Israel. And one last point, and I turn the question around to you. I don't expect you to answer it. I ask it because it demonstrates a point. When was the last time a U.S. president used any leverage and serious pressure on any American ally, partner, or friend, with the exception of Donald Trump? We don't leverage our friends.
How will that play in the world seeing the United States, specifically from partners in the Middle East?
Well, you tell me. I've watched since October 7th, 2023, 2 administrations willfully enable and acquiesce in what Netanyahu has done in Gaza, imposing no cost or consequence. You tell me what Arab state, as a consequence of what the U.S. has done, imposed any cost on either Israel or the U.S. The answer to that question is 0.
Why is that?
Israel's treaty partners, Egypt and Jordan, have not. The Abraham Accord countries, the Bahrainis, the Saudis, the Emiratis, the Moroccans. So I ask the question, to me, this is extraordinary. I would have thought that Arab states, even though they're authoritarian without exception and can ignore public opinion, maybe.
All Arab countries are authoritarian?
Yeah, I mean, they are, yeah. I mean, they're not, yes. I mean, where do you want to start? The functional ones, the ones who have functional governance. Bahrain, the Emiratis, the Saudis,
So you're
the
saying
Omanis.
all these countries who are, Trump visited them, you're saying that Trump visited and they made deals with all these authoritarian regimes.
And they couldn't get to Washington fast enough. This is something, look, despite my critics, I'm not an Israeli and I don't play one on television. I'm not a Palestinian and I'm not an Arab. And yet I do not understand why there have been no costs or consequences, none, imposed by any Arab state In fact, we tried to get Hafiz Assad to sanction direct contacts with Israel. We could not do it. And yet now you see the government of Ahmad Shara, under US mediation, meeting directly with Israelis after they have repeatedly struck and violated Syrian sovereignty and interceded to protect and to extend their influence over the Jewish community in Syria. It is head exploding. Why? I know the answer.
Mm.
The answer is that Arab governments have interests.
Money interest, national interest, money interest, geopolitical interest, what kind of interest?
Everything. MBS, who alone among Saudi leaders is pursuing what I call a 360-degree foreign policy. He's got relations with just about everybody, including the Chinese and the Russians, close relations. But MBS wants something from the United States. He wants many things. I don't see him antagonizing Donald Trump over the Palestinian issue. I don't see MBS or MBZ. So, and then people ask me, US influence in the Middle East is waning. Don't you understand the moral hazard of what you are doing? You're supporting the Israelis in Gaza. People are accusing Israelis of genocide. Don't you understand that you have no influence in this region, that people won't deal with you anymore? I'm at a loss. You tell me how it is possible for Arab states, on one hand, to genuinely care about the Palestinian issue, and their publics care more. And yet they won't do anything.
So probably the issue is the divide between the regimes of these Arab countries, the governments, and the people?
Yeah, sure, that's an explanation, but it doesn't stop.
I want to go back to the evangelical points, because this is a very important point. The evangelical support has long been the firewall for US policy, as you said, on Israel, part of it, as you mentioned earlier. But today, younger evangelicals, MAGA realists on podcasts like Marjorie Taylor Greene, like Tucker Carlson, and many others, they're wavering. And you've written that this base is fracturing. Are we looking at a generational drift or a political realignment?
Well, I think, look, I mean, all the polls, forget the evangelicals, the Pew polls show two things. Number one, there's been a significant loss of support in terms of Israel's favorability ratings. It's well over 50%. And if you look at the numbers of Democrats and Republicans that support Israel, the numbers are mirror images of one another. Most Republicans, the Republican Party by and large, even with the MAGA outliers, is the Israel can do no wrong party. And the Democratic Party is deeply divided. You saw the Senate vote on military assistance to Israel. Was it 70-something to 27? You've got 27 Democratic senators trying to pass legislation that will withhold U.S. military assistance, or at least this specific delivery, 1,000-pound bombs and other equipment, if the Israelis don't do more to deal with the humanitarian situation in Gaza. So there's no doubt, yes, it's generational. There's no question about that. The strong base of domestic support that Israel has in this country shows serious signs of fracture. Now, does that mean that we are on a straight line in which the diminution of public support would change U.S. policy toward Israel? I'm not prepared to say that yet, because I don't see the change in policy.
You've been in rooms during some of the ugliest chapters in the United States-Israel diplomacy. Did you ever imagine, for instance, that you will listen to some far-right voices in the media talking against Israel like that starving children and the images that we're seeing coming from there would be their talking
No, I
point?
mean, I think you've seen diminution in both parties, much greater tendency and frequency to criticize the Israelis. There's no question about that. The issue is this a headline or is this a trend line?
What's the
Are we
difference?
going, well, one is the moment and the other is the future.
From all those years that you have witnessed the chapters of US-Israel diplomacy and Western diplomacy with Israel, did you ever imagine one of these European countries, like the Netherlands, would call Israel a national security threat?
I mean, no, but then the question is, I raise the same question to you. I can't answer it, neither can you. Is this a moment we're looking at, or is this the shape of the future?
To help us and our listeners and viewers to understand if this is a momentarily thing or a change in the future or the statu quo. Slovenia and Sweden banning arms exports, the UK, France, Canada announcing or moving forward toward Palestinian statehood. Is this just a wave of protest to appeal maybe to what we're witnessing on social media, or these governments appealing to their base, their citizens, or the beginning of a real international pivot?
I don't, when we talk about the international community, I must tell you, I've watched since October 7.
Mm.
The response of the international community, we're approaching 2 years now in October, has been divided, self-interested, distracted, and largely feckless. They have failed to impose any single costs or consequences that would fundamentally alter US policy or Israel's policy. The Middle East is littered with the remains of great powers who wrongly believe they can impose their will, their dreams, their schemes, their ambitions on smaller powers. This is not a land of opportunity for the United States. We have interests there. We have adversaries and we have allies. And if you ask me what are the three core US interests, the three vital interests that the US has in this region, they all relate to American security and to American prosperity. We need to pursue a very determined counterterrorism policy to prevent attacks on the homeland and against our interests in the region. That's number one. Number two, we don't need Middle East oil and hydrocarbons, but the rest of the world does. So it's critically important that the free flow of that oil, and by the way, it is one of the ironies that CENTCOM produces security arrangements in the Gulf that facilitate the flow of Middle East oil to American adversaries, particularly China. And number three, the third critical interest, is that we need to prevent the emergence of a regional hegemon with a nuclear weapon.
You mean Iran?
Everything else could be very important, but I divide American interests into the must-haves, which are the three I just laid out, and the it would be nice to haves, which is all the rest. I devoted most of my life to Arab-Israeli, Israeli-Palestinian peacemaking. I wish we could accomplish something there.
You mentioned Iran.
I wish that you didn't have 5 Arab states, Lebanon, Libya, Yemen, Iraq, and Syria, in various phases of dysfunction and failure.
You mentioned Iran. When Iran tests boundaries, as they are doing now with proxies, media warfare, even aid diplomacy, are we seeing calculated escalation or calibrated chaos?
With respect
to how Iran is, maybe waiting and seeing. And
I think that some of the Iranian experts I know throw up their hands and they say, I've been following Iran for decades. I really don't know anymore. I think Iran has any number of possible choices. One is obviously more important than any of the others, which is regime preservation and survival. I don't know whether the 12 days of Israeli strikes and the hours of American strikes has further cemented Iran's conviction that they need a nuclear weapon, or whether it's given them pause, not to break out to try to achieve one, but to pursue a longer game strategy, rebuilding their proxies, maintaining ties with key Arab states, making sure the Chinese and Russia relations are functional, and then rebuilding gradually and slowly its enrichment program. Or the third option, and I don't think this is a realistic one, Iran has concluded that they need a not transformational agreement with the US, but a transactional agreement, which would cause the US to ease up on sanctions, and that they would be prepared at some point to return to the negotiating table to produce something more or less along the lines of the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action. I don't know where the Iranians are now.
Let's link those two ideas, Iran, the Gulf states, and China and Russia, since you mentioned them. The Gulf states are hedging, buying from China, selling to Russia, keeping doors open to Iran. What does that say about US influence? Or it's just evolving into something less central? Or is just as Trump mentioned in his campaign, he does not want to keep being involved in the Middle East like that. Does that mean it's just fatigue dressed up as foreign policy at this point?
No, I think Saudi Arabia, as I mentioned, is pursuing a 360-degree foreign policy. The late Saud al-Faisal told my former colleague, David Ottaway, who was once at the Washington Post, he was at the Wilson Center with me for a long time. Saud al-Faisal said, we want a Muslim marriage with the US. We don't want a Catholic divorce. We want to be able to pursue a very close relationship with you, but we have other relationships as well. And MBS, I think, has taken that to another level. I think he's hedging.
Yeah.
I think his preference would be to get things from the US. He'd want support for his own nuclear program. He wants a defense treaty. That's what the Biden administration was working on, something that will require Senate ratification, that would commit the US to the defense of Saudi Arabia.
Huh.
And I think other Gulf states as well. Bahraini less, they're more dependent on the Saudis and their, Manama hosts CENTCOM. We have two important bases in Qatar and in the UAE, Al Dhafra and Al Udeid. So no, the Gulf states, I think, would prefer the U.S. as a security partner.
Mm.
But they'd want to see what other dimensions on the financial economic side are available, particularly with oil as a key factor in the Saudi-Russia relationship. They want to keep their ties with the Chinese and the Russians as well.
You've been, as I said, you've been in the thick of this, from Clinton to Bush to Obama, and you've seen pivot points that history did not recognize at the time. What do you think is the word that the United States keep using, but it is backlashing, and probably it should be retired?
I've never believed, even though I'm a proponent of protecting American national interests, I never believed in an America First problem, because I think it leads in part to an America Alone problem.
Mm.
And I worry that we don't understand nor are willing to take seriously the needs, requirements, and interests of many of our partners in the region. And I think that situation has played out to the detriment of U.S. influence under Trump.
Thank you for listening for The Diplomat. If what you just heard made you pause, rewind, or think twice, good. That means the conversation did what it was supposed to do. You can follow the show on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, and Spotify. And if this episode gave you a different lens, share it, especially with someone who still believes politics is just policy. It's not. It's also personality, narrative, timing, and sometimes silence. Every week, I speak with people who have shaped decisions in rooms most of us never see. Because language isn't just how power explains itself, it's how power lasts. This is The Diplomat, inside the room where power speaks. Until next time.